Well, welcome back, everyone. I am thrilled to have Todd Huetner here with us. And Todd, it's a pleasure. I know we've been trying to plan this for a little while. Thanks for being here with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, as I kind of noted in our introduction, I have not covered in a whole year of a podcast. I'm more than a year into this now. And I'm all about just children, psychologists, bashing on attorneys for being overly adversarial. But I haven't done anything truly financial. And I keep thinking, well, I need to do that. That's kind of off my scope. But Todd and I had an opportunity to work on together on some things, and I have seen Todd at several different conferences, and it really started pushing in my mind the boundary of like, actually, this conversation is really important for children's best interests because the house and what we do about the house is vitally important to kids. So, Todd, maybe just start out, give us a little bit of your background and tell us, sort of as a premise, how you would agree with that. I'm sure you would. We've talked about that already. So give us a sense of why you think it's a valid thing for a children first podcast to talk about the house.
Absolutely. So my background is in real estate. I worked with real estate through family projects growing up, got my real estate license in college and started doing consulting. And in fact, I never wanted to do lending, which is a roundabout way of how I got here to some of the divorce stuff. So I would just run numbers for friends who were buying a house or refinancing. And then they'd ask me, well, why don't you do this? And I just, well, no, this is why it's a horrible industry. And everyone's like, that's why you would do a great job. And then within a year, I had worked with a lot of folks who were coming to me with complex situations. And one of them, the most frequently occurring, was divorce. And so it was a couple trying to work things out and be cooperative, even if it wasn't, kumbaya, but really spent a lot of time with them. And then over time had a situation where other people started coming to me and then they started coming to me after the fact. So I had these folks who were coming to me to help them plan it out, coming to me to help plan it out. Then these other folks who were coming to me to implement it. And that half of the folks were oftentimes stuck because things weren't done correctly. And it wasn't really just that they did it wrong. They unknowingly did things that caused problems. And so that's
Right.
how I got into this. And, flash forward 22 years and I'm very involved in the bar association, the collaborative divorce, alternative dispute resolution, which means basically anything out of court. That's where I really focus because that's where we can get better outcomes. And the thing I always tell people is focus on your kids and it'll help you get the best solution if you just focus on your kids because so much of it relates to that. And it's honestly the highest calling when people are frustrated and highly emotional about all these other things. The one thing you can usually get them to be motivated to do is to do something to help their kids, even when it doesn't, feel good to not yell back at their spouse. So a lot of that just comes down to how can we keep the house and how can we do these finances? And it's all tied together. And I say there's the legal, the emotional, and the financial aspects of divorce. And you can't ignore one or focus only on one. And all of that comes together to let's do this for the kids and find the best way to make that happen.
Wait, when you say you do it all anyway, you mean, I assume you're meaning that as part of a divorce, you're required, whether you do it with a lawyer or not, you got to do all these financial disclosures because it's like splitting up a business.
That's what I was referring to, the smart financial stuff.
Right. So everyone has to do these sworn financial statements, or if you're in other states, some iteration of that where you're
Yeah.
doing full disclosure of your financials to each
Yeah,
other.
I mean, that's what I mean. You got to do it anyway.
Yeah,
But
you do have to do it anyway.
it
And
takes a while. But for the spouse that you mentioned, who may not be the quote accountant of the house, or maybe they just didn't do certain parts of it. Maybe they paid the bills, but they didn't do the budgeting. So from that perspective, it takes a little bit longer for people to get up to speed. Plus, what I find is the person who does more with the finances tends to often actually overestimate their financial skills, while the person who doesn't do as much tends to underestimate their abilities and financial skills.
Mhm.
And so it just takes them a while to encourage them and say, you got this, because you really do. But we also, to get all the information put together, to go through it, and make sure we're not guessing and just doing a real quick number. And that's what you get in most situations when people go through this, is they just don't realize that they're not doing a full look at it. So to take the time to have to fix anything that's a surprise,
Hmm.
also be in a position where, um, you've got the ability to just get people involved, get the right information, and go through it. And it just takes a while to put together and reduce that anxiety. It's so critical. And then the last piece I say is just the asterisk. I have never had anyone tell me they started too early.
Yeah, that's so
One
true.
thing that people say is, I wish I would have started sooner. Like, as far as just a general statement, those those things are true. And that's why there's a ton of other benefits to starting sooner than later. But those are the top three. And like I said, no one's ever said I started too soon. And the more time you can spend on this without rushing it, the more comfortable you can become with this, the better your outcome's going to be, the better the process will be, and the better you will be as a person and as a parent for your kids.
If you can't keep the house, it doesn't work, right? Like you've looked at somebody who's specialized, you've looked at different options. And I guess I want to just point out too, just in case we weren't really clear, like part of the pieces that Todd, you have brought to my cases, for example, is bringing in that intelligence to say, for example, if we started spousal maintenance for 6 months, that would be, maybe, why don't you talk about those things? We talked as we were prepping about those 5 areas of income.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that before we move
Yeah,
in.
no, that's a good one, because
I think that's really important.
it is. And this is where a deep dive helps the individual person, because these are a few things, that red flags that people they're talking to, whether it's their attorney or other financial professionals, aren't mentioning these things. It's really critical. So when it comes to the house, of keeping the house, I always say we want to look at keep, buy, and rent. You can keep your current house, you could buy another house, or you could rent. And I don't care what you tell me you're going to do or you will not do. I'd say just look at all three. Again, it's so you know what those three roads look like. And you don't know how badly you want to do the one until you know how good or how bad the others are. The other thing is, it doesn't take a lot of time, if you do your homework right, to just look at the other scenarios. So that's the most important thing. And to keep your house, you can assume the current loan, maybe, to keep that awesome low rate. There's a lot of strings attached with that. And then you could also refinance it. And then buying is pretty straightforward, and so is renting, right?
And let me
So
just pause and say, one of the big challenges we've
yeah.
had lately is that refinancing changes the rate. Does assuming too?
So assuming doesn't change the rate, but you can't change anything, including the loan amount. So you typically can't put a loan behind it. If there is a loan that's behind it that wasn't when you got the first one, you got to pay it off or get rid of it. So how do you pay off your spouse? How do you buy out your spouse's equity? So that's the biggest challenge. So you get this sweet silver bullet of this low rate, but how do you solve those other problems? If you solve those other problems with a refinance, now you lose that awesome low rate. So again, it's trying to massage those two things. That's why keeping the house is way more complex than the alternatives. So if you focus on keeping the house, but plug in those two other scenarios, you've looked at all possibilities, because that's the reality, is you got to live somewhere. It's your largest monthly expense usually. And the issue with the house is it's binary. You, it, with any type of other asset, largely, you can split it and divide it any which way you
Yeah,
want.
right. It's
With
like
a
all or
house, you either
nothing.
keep it all or you can't. And yes, you can get a loan amount to the dollar, but it's still this binary thing of, can you keep it or not, which makes it hard. And so if there was one place to take a little bit of a deep dive to help people understand, and this is for professionals too, but it's
Yeah,
really,
good
this is
question.
going to
Yeah.
help the homeowner the most. There are 5 types of income typically in divorce. So the first is earned income or employed income. Now, there's a lot of snags here for people with divorce. So number one is, if you're self-employed, do you have a 2-year history? What if you have income? Self-employed income goes up and down all the time, or people who are on commission. Well, if you have declining income in lending, we can't count it at all in in some circumstances if it's declining by more than 20%. So there are certain ways you can avoid that, or at least address it head on. Again, start early.
Yeah.
The biggest is re-entering the workforce for a spouse who stayed at home, typically mom, but more often dad these days, but someone who postponed a career or really never started a career because they were going to be the homemaker. And so how do I restart that career? How do I start working? How long do I need to work before I can count that income? What type of income? And so there's a lot of nuances.